Hey guys, tonight we begin with a question. If you ask someone, what were medieval people like? They will probably say, dirty, uneducated, always coughing, and they thought the earth was flat. And that person, on almost every single count, is completely wrong. Tonight we are going to break apart some myths about the Middle Ages that you probably learned in school, saw in documentaries, and kept believing because, well, they sounded good. The truth doesn't always sound quite as satisfying, but the truth is very often far stranger. So let's begin. Myth number 1. Everyone in the Middle Ages smelled absolutely terrible all the time. Films would have you believe medieval Europe was one enormous invisible cloud, a combination of sweat, mud, onions, wet sheep, and emotional suffering. Yes, medieval cities, particularly London, were overcrowded, smoky, and extremely loud. The streets were covered in mud, horse manure, and rotting food. Chamber pots were emptied directly from upper windows into the streets below, which turned a pleasant afternoon walk through London into something resembling a military tactical exercise. The rivers looked as though they had personally given up on humanity. But despite all of this, the medieval people themselves cared deeply about cleanliness. Whenever they had the opportunity, they washed their faces, hands, and bodies. Wealthier households purchased scented soaps, oils, perfumes, and herbal rinses imported from across Europe. Clean linen underclothing was considered essential because people genuinely believed that clean linen absorbed sweat and dirt from the body. In many ways, they treated clean shirts the way we treat therapy apps. Even poorer households made regular attempts at washing whenever they had access to water and time. So, where did the myth come from? Modern people compare medieval hygiene to modern plumbing, which is deeply unfair. Future historians are going to judge us too. Imagine someone trying to explain energy drinks, artificial cheese powder, and why people screamed at strangers online about celebrities they had never met. Future archaeologists will probably delete us out of respect. Of course, medieval England smelled unpleasant overall. Dentistry was terrifying. Sewage systems rarely functioned, and many streets essentially operated as open-air experimental fields for bacteria. But the idea that medieval people proudly marinated in filth for months at a time, that is mostly fiction. They disliked bad smells just as much as we do. They simply lacked deodorant, indoor plumbing, and that revolutionary modern invention known as not throwing human waste directly outside your front door. Myth number 2. Everyone in the Middle Ages thought the earth was flat. This is probably one of the most popular myths in all of history, and it is completely false. Educated Europeans had known the earth was round for centuries. Ancient Greek scholars had already calculated the earth's circumference long before the medieval dynasties even existed. Medieval universities taught the concept openly. Medieval sailors regularly used astronomy, maps, and mathematical calculations. What people actually argued about was not whether the earth was round, but how big it actually was. This misunderstanding became important during the age of exploration. Christopher Columbus, for example, incorrectly believed Asia was much closer to Europe than it really was. He discovered entire continents standing directly in his path. An embarrassing moment for geography, though probably quite exciting for adventure. The flat earth myth became especially popular later, in the 19th century. Writers and intellectuals wanted to portray earlier centuries as hopelessly ignorant, so that modern society would appear dramatically enlightened by comparison. Which is amusing, because future historians will probably look at us and wonder why we voluntarily drank fluorescent energy drinks and screamed online at strangers named things like Dragon King. Every generation believes it has finally defeated human stupidity forever. Every generation is immediately proven wrong. Myth number 3. Everyone in the Middle Ages drank beer because water was too dangerous. According to the internet, the average medieval citizen woke up every morning, downed 6 mugs of ale before breakfast, and spent the rest of the day mildly intoxicated until losing the basic functions required for elementary mathematics. Reality, as usual, is less dramatic and slightly more disappointing. Medieval people drank water. Wells, springs, rivers, rainwater systems, and local streams all served as drinking water sources in daily life. In rural areas especially, clean water sources were often perfectly usable. Cities were a different matter entirely. London's water quality could become genuinely unpleasant due to overcrowding, sewage, industrial waste, dead animals, and humanity generally treating sanitation as somebody else's problem. The River Thames occasionally resembled a giant moving warning sign. So yes, ale and beer became extremely common beverages, but not because everyone was always drunk, rather because the brewing process boiled water during production, and low alcohol small beer provided calories and hydration with virtually no intoxicating effect. Children drank it too. They invented the concept of drinking something slightly depressing throughout the workday, centuries before office coffee culture existed. Excessive drunkenness certainly existed, but the idea that everyone walked around intoxicated all day, that is wildly exaggerated. Most people worked constantly, farming, labor, cooking, trade, and survival. Those tasks required the ability to function. Most people could not afford to spend the day unconscious in a ditch singing folk songs about cabbage. Statistically, at least one person probably tried. In this module, we have broken 3 major myths, and we have only just started. Next, we move to one of the most misunderstood monarchs in all of history. A man imagined as a gigantic, furious king, whose real story is far more interesting, far more tragic, and considerably more complicated. Stay with us. When you picture Henry VIII, you probably see a very specific image. Enormous, furious, lumbering through a castle, demanding executions and roasted meat every 15 minutes. Late in life, yes, he absolutely became that. In his final years, Henry could barely walk. He suffered from severe leg ulcers. Reports suggest he needed special devices just to move his body around the palace. Court servants had the deeply unfortunate responsibility of assisting a king who had essentially become a heavily decorated avalanche. But young Henry? Completely different person. Young Henry was considered one of the most impressive princes in all of Europe. He was tall, athletic, educated, charming, obsessed with physical competition. He hunted for hours, wrestled, jousted in dangerous tournaments, played tennis, danced at court celebrations, constantly tried to display his strength and elegance. Foreign ambassadors praised his appearance relentlessly. Some described him as the perfect Renaissance prince. If Tudor England had fitness influences, Henry would absolutely have been standing in front of polished armor, whispering about discipline and greatness, before immediately eating an entire swan. He was also terrifyingly interested in fashion. Henry wore silk, velvet, jewels, embroidered fabrics, golden chains, feathered hats, and padded outfits designed to make him appear even broader and more dominant. Some of his clothing was so overloaded with decoration that he probably jingled slightly while walking through corridors. Then everything changed. After years of injuries and political stress, the most important turning point came during a jousting accident. Henry was thrown from his horse and badly injured. Historians believe the accident permanently damaged his health, possibly his personality as well. As his physical condition deteriorated, Henry became less active, gained enormous weight, and grew increasingly paranoid. Chronic pain from infected leg wounds followed him constantly. Advisors suddenly fell from favor. Court politics became more dangerous. Wives discovered that royal marriage occasionally concluded with unexpected appointments involving a man holding an axe. The truth is far more uncomfortable than the myth. Henry was not born a monstrous tyrant. He slowly became one, through pain, fear, unchecked power, and years of surrounding himself with people too terrified to ever say no to him, which, historically speaking, rarely improves anyone's personality. A small subhook. Here is something about Henry that almost nobody discusses. His obsession with clothing was actually a political weapon. In his famous portraits, Henry appears enormous, broad-shouldered, dominant, and almost physically invincible. Artists deliberately emphasized his strength. Wide stance, massive sleeves, expensive fabrics, jewelry, and direct eye contact all projected authority. These paintings were essentially the 16th century equivalent of carefully edited social media profiles. Except instead of filters, artists used oil paint and fear. And the reality was, the actual Henry looked considerably less intimidating as he aged. Nobody wanted foreign powers staring at a portrait thinking the king looked tired and slightly fragile. That inspires invasion, not loyalty. So Tudor portrait painters understood something centuries before modern advertising agencies did. If you control the image, you control the story. And if the story looks glamorous enough, most people stop asking inconvenient questions about reality. Now we are moving away from royalty and towards something you have probably completely misunderstood: medieval women. A common misconception. Medieval women, particularly in England, were completely powerless beings. According to films, they spent their days silently embroidering beside fireplaces while men handled politics, business, and every important decision that ever mattered. Now, Tudor society was undeniably patriarchal. Men controlled most official positions. Women faced major legal restrictions. Marriage often determined a woman's entire future. But the popular image of Tudor women as powerless decorative furniture is deeply misleading. In reality, women constantly influenced Tudor society, both visibly and invisibly. Noble women managed enormous households that functioned almost like small governments. They supervised servants, handled finances, arranged marriages, organized supplies, oversaw education, and maintained family alliances. Running a large Tudor estate required intelligence, diplomacy, and enough patience to survive daily interactions with ambitious relatives wearing wool tights. And worth noting, those ambitious relatives wore wool tights. Women worked outside noble life as well. Women brewed and sold ale in markets, sold goods, managed shops, worked in textiles, and helped run family businesses. Widows especially could gain surprising independence because they sometimes inherited property or commercial responsibilities. And then there was the most famous Tudor woman in history, Elizabeth I. Elizabeth ruled England for decades, while male advisors repeatedly tried to explain leadership to the actual Queen of England. A truly timeless male tradition. Elizabeth understood politics brilliantly. She transformed her public image into a weapon. Her speeches, portraits, clothing, and behavior were all carefully controlled to project authority and stability. She strategically delayed marriage negotiations, using European princes as pieces on a diplomatic chessboard. In doing so, she avoided the danger of surrendering political power to a husband, because Tudor marriage was not romantic equality. A husband often gained enormous control over his wife's property, influence, and decisions. Elizabeth understood this perfectly. She looked at centuries of dangerous royal marriages and essentially decided, absolutely not. Which, considering Tudor history, was probably one of the most emotionally intelligent decisions ever made by any monarch. Marriage meant losing power for a queen, so she used the possibility of marriage as diplomatic leverage while never actually committing to it. For years, foreign ambassadors spent entire careers trying to decode her intentions, while Elizabeth calmly continued being queen, probably laughing quietly on the inside. The myth survives because history books spent centuries focusing almost entirely on powerful men. Meanwhile, countless women quietly managed households, businesses, estates, and political alliances, while the men beside them posed dramatically for portraits and developed extremely serious opinions about hats. Which, to be fair, Tudor hats were extremely serious business. Myth number 4. Tudor people ate miserable, flavorless food. Modern imagination pictures Tudor food as endless bowls of grey soup eaten sadly beside candles. Reality is far more complicated and actually far stranger. Wealthy Tudor households ate enormous varieties of food. Royal feasts included roasted meats, pies, fish, cheeses, fruits, pastries, custards, sugar desserts, and exotic spices imported from Asia and the Middle East. Cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, ginger, and saffron were prized symbols of wealth. If your dinner contained enough spice, people assumed you were important or dangerously irresponsible with money. Feasts became elaborate theatrical performances. Noble tables displayed dozens of dishes at once, sometimes more for visual intimidation than actual eating. Sugar sculptures shaped like castles, animals, or mythological scenes decorated feasts. Some pies even contained live birds, released dramatically during the meal. Because Tudor nobles occasionally planned dinners the same way modern people plan gender reveal parties, with a similarly baffling level of chaos. The wealthy especially loved showing off through food. A roasted peacock could be served with its colorful feathers reattached, so guests could admire the bird before eating it, which feels unnecessarily aggressive toward the peacock. Poorer Tudors naturally ate simpler diets. Bread, cheese, pottage, vegetables, onions, oats, and ale formed the backbone of daily meals for ordinary families. Winter diets could become repetitive very quickly. Imagine spending months staring at turnips and trying to convince yourself this counts as culinary excitement. Still, Tudor cooking was not flavorless survival food. People used herbs constantly. Cooking techniques were surprisingly advanced, and Tudor culinary culture put far more thought into food than people often assume. The truly strange part of Tudor cuisine was the medical theory of food. Certain foods were believed to affect your personality, emotions, or physical balance. Eating incorrectly could supposedly transform your entire health, which is not dramatically different from modern internet wellness influences. Next, we move into Tudor medicine, which, in summary, was a strange mixture of organized guesswork performed by very confident people. Things get worse. Modern people often assume Tudor doctors were basically early versions of modern physicians, perhaps less advanced, but still guided by logic and medical understanding. This is an extremely generous interpretation. Tudor medicine was a strange mixture of genuine observation, herbal knowledge, superstition, astrology, and complete chaos, held together entirely by confidence. Doctors believed the human body depended on balancing four bodily humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. If you became sick, the physician assumed one of these invisible fluids had become dramatic. Treatments focused on restoring balance. This usually meant bloodletting, purging, vomiting, sweating, fasting, herbal mixtures, or applying substances that sound less like medicine and more like ingredients discovered during a kitchen accident. If you survived the treatment, it was considered successful. If you died, the illness was apparently very severe, an impressively flexible system. Astrology also played a major role in medicine. Doctors consulted star charts before performing procedures because many believed planetary movements directly affected the body. Imagine arriving with severe stomach pain only to hear your physician mutter, "Unfortunately, Saturn appears irritated today." This does not inspire confidence. Surprisingly, not all Tudor medicine was useless. Some herbal remedies genuinely worked. Certain plants had calming, antibacterial, or pain-relieving properties. Experienced healers understood practical treatments for wounds, fevers, and infections better than people often assume. But surgery was absolutely horrifying. Without anesthesia, patients were physically restrained during procedures. Speed mattered more than precision because screaming patients had an inconvenient tendency to move during amputations. Surgical tools were poorly cleaned. Infection spread easily. Survival depended heavily on luck, strength, and whether your surgeon had recently slept. And dentistry was somehow even worse. Tooth extraction involved iron tools, brute force, and emotional acceptance. Wealthy Tudors consumed enormous amounts of sugar, which rapidly destroyed their teeth. By middle age, many nobles suffered chronic pain and blackened teeth. Even Elizabeth I reportedly developed severe dental problems from excessive sugar consumption, which means history's most powerful queen was ultimately defeated by dessert. The strangest part is that Tudor doctors genuinely believed they were helping people. Medicine was respected, difficult, and intellectually serious for its time. Physicians carefully studied ancient texts and tried to understand the body using whatever knowledge was available to them. Unfortunately, the available knowledge occasionally suggested that repeatedly bleeding sick people was an excellent long-term strategy. Humanity has always been remarkably confident while being completely wrong. A subhook. Here is something people rarely discuss. The most interesting thing about Tudor medicine is not how terrible it was. It is that Tudor doctors were genuine professionals within their time. They studied at universities. They read ancient texts. They kept careful notes. The problem was not a lack of effort. The problem was foundational knowledge that had not yet developed. And that is actually the most unsettling thought of all, because it means that some medical practices from our own era that we currently consider scientific may be viewed by future generations as the equivalent of Tudor bloodletting. Perhaps the hats were Tudor civilization's greatest achievement. They were beautiful. Nobody got sick from wearing them. Next, we move to a myth that survives in every history classroom: medieval marriage ages. And why you have probably completely misunderstood this. Many people believe that everyone in the Middle Ages married at 12 years old and immediately began producing heirs, still emotionally recovering from learning basic algebra. This belief usually comes from reading about royal families and assuming all of society behaved the same way. In reality, most ordinary Tudor people married much later. For common men and women, marriage required something extremely inconvenient: financial stability. Couples needed enough money to support a household, buy supplies, rent property, and survive periods of bad harvest or unemployment. Because even in the 16th century, romance was unfortunately still attached to economics. Women typically married in their early to mid-20s. Men often married slightly later, after establishing work or completing apprenticeships. Noble families were different. Among the aristocracy, marriages were often political arrangements designed to secure alliances, land, titles, or royal favor. Betrothal between very young nobles did happen, but actual married life was usually delayed until later teenage years. The internet hears betrothal and immediately imagines children managing castles before puberty. History is strange enough already without adding unnecessary drama. Life expectancy also confuses people. Tudor averages looked low, mainly because infant mortality was horrifyingly high. Many children died young from disease or malnutrition, but adults who survived childhood could live into their 50s, 60s, or beyond. The myth survives because modern audiences prefer dramatic historical narratives. Everyone in history married at 12 and lived in misery. That sounds shocking and emotionally satisfying. The truth is more ordinary. Most Tudor people worried about work, food, rent, marriage prospects, bad weather, illness, taxes, and whether their neighbors were secretly unstable, which is unfortunately a strangely timeless human experience. Myth number 5. Medieval people spent every moment in desperate prayer. Modern films often portray Tudor England as a world where every single person spends the entire day praying with full spiritual intensity, fearing hell, and discussing religion while church bells echo dramatically in the background. Religion undeniably dominated Tudor society. Church attendance was expected. Religious festivals shaped the calendar. People prayed regularly. They genuinely believed in heaven, hell, and divine punishment. Religion influenced law, politics, education, medicine, and daily behavior. But this does not mean every Tudor person walked around in a permanent state of spiritual enlightenment. Many people practiced religion because society demanded it. Others followed rituals out of habit, fear, family tradition, or simple survival. Having the wrong religious beliefs in Tudor England could become less of a personal matter and more of a swift appointment with government officials carrying rope. The English Reformation made everything considerably more confusing. Under Henry VIII, England broke away from the authority of the Pope. Under Edward VI, England pushed further toward Protestant reforms. Under Mary I, Catholicism was aggressively restored. Then Elizabeth I shifted England back toward Protestantism once again. Imagine trying to survive while the correct version of Christianity changed every few years. One decade, you safely attend Mass. The next decade, the same behavior makes you politically suspicious. Then suddenly, the rules reverse again because the monarchy has changed. Ordinary people adapted however they could. Some genuinely cared deeply about theology and risked death for their beliefs. Others simply tried to avoid trouble and continue farming without accidentally committing religious offenses before breakfast, which sounds emotionally exhausting. Next, executions. Because there is another major myth about Tudor England that survives in every film forever. Executions, and why the average Tudor person saw far fewer of them than films suggest. Modern films and documentaries portray Tudor England as one endless parade of executions, where every disagreement immediately ends with someone dramatically losing their head in front of a shocked crowd. To be fair, Tudor punishments could be brutally violent. Executions were public spectacles. Traitors could be executed in ways horrifying enough that even describing them fully sounds like a medieval writer trying too hard to impress other medieval writers. Beheading was considered a more honorable death for nobles, which is a strange sentence when you stop and think about it for more than 4 seconds. But the average Tudor citizen was not witnessing executions week after week while casually shopping for onions. For an ordinary citizen, public executions were relatively rare events. That is partly why they drew enormous crowds whenever they did occur. People traveled to watch them because they were dramatic, terrifying, and socially significant. The Tudor government deliberately used punishment as a visible weapon. The message was clear. See what happens when you challenge the king. Under Henry VIII, treason laws became especially dangerous. Criticizing royal policy could rapidly become life-threatening. Carelessly speaking at the wrong tavern could destroy entire families. Tudor England deeply enjoyed neighbors informing on neighbors. Religious tensions created suspicion everywhere. Court politics became survival competitions disguised as elegant conversations. Smiling politely at dinner while secretly planning someone's destruction was practically a professional skill at court, especially around rulers like Henry VIII. Modern films and documentaries portray Tudor England as one endless parade of executions, where every disagreement immediately ends with someone dramatically losing their head in front of a shocked crowd. To be fair, Tudor punishments could be brutally violent. Executions were public spectacles. Traitors could be executed in ways horrifying enough that even describing them fully sounds like a medieval writer trying too hard to impress other medieval writers. Beheading was considered a more honorable death for nobles, which is a strange sentence when you stop and think about it for more than 4 seconds. But the average Tudor citizen was not witnessing executions week after week while casually shopping for onions. For an ordinary citizen, public executions were relatively rare events. That is partly why they drew enormous crowds whenever they did occur. People traveled to watch them because they were dramatic, terrifying, and socially significant. The Tudor government deliberately used punishment as a visible weapon. The message was clear. See what happens when you challenge the king. Under Henry VIII, treason laws became especially dangerous. Criticizing royal policy could rapidly become life-threatening. Carelessly speaking at the wrong tavern could destroy entire families. Tudor England deeply enjoyed neighbors informing on neighbors. Religious tensions created suspicion everywhere. Court politics became survival competitions disguised as elegant conversations. Smiling politely at dinner while secretly planning someone's destruction was practically a professional skill at court, especially around rulers like Henry VIII. The famous executions, Anne Boleyn, Thomas More, and many others, echoed across Europe because they demonstrated how unstable royal favor could become. One day you are advising the king. The next day you are receiving extremely unpleasant feedback from a man holding an axe. The myth survives because executions make Tudor history feel dramatic and cinematic. But most Tudor people were not living every waking moment in constant terror. They were living ordinary lives focused on work, food, survival, religion, and avoiding disease. A government that occasionally reminded everyone in extremely public fashion that obedience was highly encouraged. The strangest truth about Tudor court. Here is something most people fail to understand. Tudor politics was essentially smiling politely at dinner while secretly planning to destroy someone before dessert. Being present at court meant every interaction with powerful people was an evaluation. Power was displayed, not directly, but through personality, clothing, social networks, and how long the king spoke with you. Sitting with the wrong alliance, making one wrong comment, or spending too much time with the wrong person could destroy a career or a life. Tudor court looked like a palace, but felt like a psychological battlefield wearing elegant clothing. Trust had roughly the shelf life of warm milk. If Tudor court politics makes modern office politics look easy, good. It should. Because Tudor office politics occasionally ended with the physical removal of someone's head using an axe. Modern HR departments, by most reasonable arguments, represent an improvement. Next, our final module, where we confront the whole Tudor picture. A question that rarely gets asked. Was Tudor England actually as backward as we think? Or are we deliberately making the past look stupid so we feel better about the present? Modern history books and films present Tudor England as a backward world where ignorant peasants stumble through mud, die of disease, and catch the plague the moment somebody sneezes nearby. Yes, Tudor life was hard. Disease spread easily. Sanitation was weak. Medical knowledge was limited. Many people died from things modern medicine treats easily today. But Tudor England was also a period of extraordinary intellectual and technological change. The printing press was spreading rapidly across Europe. Books and ideas were circulating faster than ever before. Literacy was slowly increasing. Universities were growing in importance. Scholars were becoming increasingly interested in science, navigation, engineering, and classical learning. This was the Renaissance reaching England. People studied astronomy, mathematics, architecture, philosophy, and geography with genuine seriousness. Exploration was dramatically expanding. Trade networks were growing larger. New discoveries constantly reshaped how people understood the world. Tudor shipbuilding alone advanced remarkably during this era. English ships improved in speed, navigation, and firepower during the 16th century. Sailors crossed enormous oceans using mathematics, astronomy, maps, and instruments surprisingly sophisticated for their time. Of course, many voyages still ended with starvation, shipwrecks, disease, mutiny, and slowly dying somewhere unfamiliar, while a captain insisted everything was completely under control. Tudor England also achieved impressive things in art, music, literature, and architecture. The world of William Shakespeare, elaborate royal palaces, growing theatres, increasingly complex political diplomacy. Court politics itself was almost frighteningly sophisticated. Ambassadors exchanged coded letters across Europe. Spies gathered intelligence across entire continents. Noble families maneuvered constantly for influence. Entire political careers could rise or collapse based on one poorly worded sentence at dinner. That makes modern office politics look genuinely relaxing by comparison. At least in a modern office, the wrong sentence usually ends in redundancy rather than the physical removal of your head. So was Tudor England backward? In some ways, inevitably, yes. But every civilization looks backward when measured against the one that comes after it. Future generations will probably have opinions about our processed food, reality television, internet conspiracy theories, and people recording themselves dancing in grocery stores for social validation. Future historians may conclude we collectively sustained head injuries. Every civilization believes it is dramatically more advanced than everything before it. Then history waits quietly for a few centuries and humbles everyone equally. Final thoughts. Every myth about Tudor England we have broken tonight follows the same pattern. We like to simplify the past. Smelly, stupid, joyless people eating beige food, who occasionally cut each other's heads off between arguments about hats. It is easy to understand. It is enjoyable to say. It is not true. Tudor people were complex, adaptive, intelligent, and deeply insecure. They were trying to survive plague, bad politics, constantly shifting religion, and a medical system that was sometimes far worse than the illness itself. They laughed. They gossiped. They fell in love. They cheated. They created art. They made terrible decisions. They built careers. They rebuilt lives after devastating disasters. They were people. And perhaps that is the most important truth history has to offer. People in the past were not the stupid dramatic characters of simple stories. They were confused, frightened, dreaming, occasionally brave, and frequently inconsistent. Just like us, only with considerably worse dentistry and significantly less plumbing. And perhaps that connection, seeing the past as no less human than the present, is what real history actually is. Everything else is just us simplifying the story to feel better about ourselves. And in doing that, we are not so different from the Tudors at all. That is all for tonight. If you enjoyed this, take a moment, Like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is for you. It is always fascinating to see who is joining us from around the world. Until next time, good night.